Everyone in this country is equal before the law. We cannot allow this murder to turn communities against one another. We must condemn those who seek personal political profit from tragedy.
Are you saying, Cathy, that it is inappropriate to take anger that people feel as a result of this tragedy for political purposes? Is that what you're putting to me?
I'm listening to what the family has said, and they said they don't want this terrible tragedy to be used to stoke division, and that is what we have. We have this huge political row now.
He's absolutely right that the IOPC are looking at this. There are clearly serious questions that need to be addressed.
And when I say there's an anger there, I think we need to look at addressing what happened and why. And it's really, really important that not to turn that into that hatred and division that Henry's dad has warned against.
After Henry Nowak's killer was sentenced to life in prison, his father, Mark, said he wanted to use the family's heartbreak to, as he put it, make change for the better.
We do not want his death to be used to create further division, hatred or tension.
Less than 24 hours later, the Reform Party leader paid tribute to Henry's family before speaking directly to the public.
Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage.
It sounded to his opponents like an invitation for people to vent their anger. The Home Secretary later told the Commons that police officers have been subjected to death threats, one forced out of his home.
Misinformation and inflammatory commentary is making a dreadful situation even worse.
This is the world as Nigel Farage sees it.
We're living in a two-tier culture in this country where the rights and privileges of white people matter less than those of ethnic minorities. We need a change in culture. Enough of anti-white prejudice. A promotion of the idea that white lives matter just as much as black lives. An end to DEI and positive discrimination.
It's a concept he set out after the Southport murders, when riots erupted, fuelled by false claims the killer was a Muslim asylum seeker. Farage thought far-right protesters were more swiftly arrested than those on the left.
Most of us think that ethnic minority groups are policed entirely differently to that of white British people. Folks, that is what the country feels.
Keir Starmer denied it emphatically.
There's no two-tier policing. There is policing without fear or favour, exactly as it should be, exactly what I would expect and require. So that is a non-issue.
But today, watch this response to suggestions that fear of racism clouded the judgment of officers as Henry Nowak lay dying. The police watchdog is investigating.
I do think included in that will have to be this question of how accusations, allegations of racism informed or fed into the decision-making in that particular case, because it is impossible to watch that footage and not appreciate that those questions absolutely have to be answered.
When the Scarman report, the Macpherson inquiry, the Casey review have repeatedly called out the everyday reality of police racism against black and minority ethnic people, Farage's claims of a police service riven by anti-white prejudice have struck his opponents as inflammatory. But the PM's apparent reluctance to repeat his previous angry denials of two-tier policing hints perhaps at a nervousness that the public might have decided where their sympathies lie. Well, tonight it has emerged that one of the officers in the case has resigned. With the latest on that case, which has provoked so much political debate and soul-searching, here's Sky's Molly Malone. And just to warn you, her report does contain footage of the moment of Henry's arrest, which you may find distressing.
You've been stabbed? Whereabouts? Don't think you have, mate.
Henry Nowak had been stabbed multiple times by a stranger. When the police came to the scene, they put him in handcuffs.
Oh, I can't breathe. Put the hand in the cuff, mate. Yeah. This is like...
He said that 9 times, but remained cuffed.
Has anyone been hurt other than him?
Yeah, me. He's grabbed my brother, he's took my turban off, started grabbing my head.
Are you injured?
Yeah, I've got swollen eye, little bruises.
Right.
It came after what the judge described as wicked lies from this man, Vikram Digwa. He'd attacked and murdered Henry, but instead he and his brother claimed it was Vikram that had been racially abused.
You know, it's light, it's clear, you can see that.
We showed the footage to a former senior police officer.
I cannot understand why you would handcuff somebody who's so vulnerable, who can't speak, who's clearly very, very seriously injured, why you would handcuff them with their arms behind their back.
What lessons do you think can be learned from what you can see?
Well, I think the first thing is that for the police officers to understand the importance of investigating when they go along to a scene, not to take things at face value, not just because somebody says that this is a racist incident, assume that the person who makes the allegation is correct. You still have to investigate it.
So essentially, in your view, these officers needed to approach that scene with an open mind and they needed to investigate?
In a nutshell, that's it.
It was the content of this nearly 12-minute 999 call that the police say they were acting upon.
Police emergency.
Yeah, we just been attacked by someone racially. He's pushed me back and my turban's come off. He started then grabbing my head, so I then grabbed him and then he started pushing me, attacking me even further and everything like that.
It will now be for the police watchdog to examine the actions of the officers involved. They've also said they'll meet Henry's family and update them on their investigation.
I have seen the body cam footage. It's harrowing. And I have to say, as a father of a 17-year-old boy, I felt sick watching it. It is absolutely right that the IOPC are looking at this. There are clearly serious questions that need to be addressed, not least how accusations of racism informed the decision-making in this case.
Outside court yesterday, Henry's father asked that his son's death should not be used to create division or hatred. But already, a misidentified police officer has received death threats amid warnings about misinformation and allegations of two-tier policing.
Enough of anti-white prejudice. A promotion of the idea that white lives matter just as much as black lives. Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage.
But the Home Secretary pushed back, warning about a dangerous undercurrent emerging.
The police in this country have a sacred duty to police without fear or favour. Everyone in this country is equal before the law. We must condemn those who seek personal political profit from tragedy.
Henry's dad has said his son died without dignity, while he himself has been praised for the dignity shown in his fight for justice. The Attorney General will review whether Vikram Digwa's at least 21 years in prison is long enough for his crime. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Well, our crime commentator Martin Brunt joins us now. Martin, tell us first about this officer resigning now.
I don't know an awful lot about it, but Hampshire Police put out a statement, less than an hour ago, suggesting that there were, or confirming there were 4 officers involved. 3 of them were still serving, and 1 had resigned. This was in answer to journalist questions as the day has gone on. They confirmed that all the officers involved were still being treated as witnesses. Now, the issue with all of them is that we don't know whether they've yet given any statements to the police watchdog, the IOPC. Any interviews that the watchdog wanted to do with them may have been held up by the trial that's just finished. And they did confirm, the police confirmed, that all of them were being treated as witnesses so far, which may give you an indication of the investigation, how far it's gone. I imagine that since the end of the trial, those interviews will happen soon, if they haven't already happened. Now, the position of the officer who's resigned, and we don't know if it's a male or female, is rather different. I'm not sure what that officer can be compelled to do now he or she has resigned. The status of the officers is witness, but of course that could change. They could come under criminal investigation or be investigated for breaches of discipline. The officer who's retired can't escape if the IOPC investigators decide to pursue him or her under criminal law. He or she won't be able to avoid that, but will avoid any disciplinary action.
Martin, thanks very much for giving us that update. On the sofa today is former Conservative Minister Lord Ed Vaizey and Labour peer Thangam Debonair. This has turned into quite an enormous political row. Thangam, whatever both of you may find Nigel Farage's messaging unpalatable, but does he have a point about two-tier policing in this country?
I don't think he does, but I think this is a very difficult context to be discussing this in, because a horrific murder has happened and we're just getting the details now. And it's horrible to hear. I've heard the clip rather than watched it. So, of course, politicians are reacting. I think what Nigel's doing is using an incident in which there's been an absolute tragedy, and actually he seems to have ignored what the parents and the family have said and is trying to turn it into an opportunity to make a political point.
His exact point is that you're just commentating on this now, but when it was George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, Nigel Farage's point is that Labour politicians were taking the knee, they were speaking out in a way that they haven't done on this case until now.
Well, I have to say, until the verdict, I didn't know about this case.
Yeah, but is that your failing? I mean, is that the failing of the political classes, that we weren't aware of this?
Because there is a murder that has taken place. I'm not aware of every single murder, and I'm sure that Nigel isn't either. And I'm not quite sure what the point you're making is, and I'm sure I do know what the point Nigel's making is, which is that he's trying to turn this into a political point. He's trying to find a way of turning a horrific murder, an absolute tragedy, a family tragedy, and a man has gone to prison, and rightly so, and he's trying to take that into a political point, and I'm not really sure where that's going to get us.
We'll be putting all of those questions to Zia Yusuf from Reform later in the programme. But I mean, the point is, Ed, that this has turned into exactly the kind of political row that the family didn't want.
Well, that's my understanding, absolutely. The Nowak family have apparently said they didn't want their son's awful death, his terrible murder, to become a political football, and that's exactly what Nigel Farage is seeking to do. He gave a speech at 8 o'clock this morning. He's not been in front of the press for a month now because of the row over the £5 million he received from a crypto billionaire. So he's been in hiding, but he's come out because he thinks this is an issue that he can politicise, and it will bring him dividends. And what I find so appalling,
Kemi Badenoch was out on the breakfast sofas before
what I find so
which is the case,
appalling about these people is that they call themselves patriots. They have these marches where they attack police officers. They're outside Southampton police station now, intimidating police officers. We know that one police officer who was mistakenly identified as having been at that scene has apparently had to leave his home. The police do an incredibly difficult job.
But address the point that your leader got to it before he did, and she was stoking division.
My leader, Kemi Badenoch, has not been in hiding for the last month. My leader, Kemi Badenoch, has been commenting on all sorts of political issues. This is a news story, and she was asked onto a mainstream political programme, scrutinised by two journalists, interviewed by two journalists, to make the points that she wanted to make about this issue.
And that's in many ways, that's just not the same as Nigel Farage choosing that this is an issue, having heard what the parents said, and thought, no, I'll just ignore that. That's their tragedy, and he's giving them no say in the fact that he's decided he does want it making into a political football.
I mean,
it is outrageous.
Pay tribute to the parents' dignity and
then took no notice of them.
And then set himself up as their spokesman. This is a horrific murder by an evil man, and there is a politician out there who is seeking to divide communities.
Well, should your leaders be hosing it down then, rather than adding to the debate?
Well, I think Kemi Badenoch did hose it down. She said exactly that all lives matter, and this is not an issue which should divide our communities.
And I think today, in the House of Commons, Shabana Mahmood gave an incredibly dignified, thoughtful statement in which she addressed the various aspects of this case, as she should. She's Home Secretary. She took on all comers, difficult questions, but she did so with dignity, and at no point that I can see did she try and turn this into something that the family would not have wanted. She paid tribute to the family, and she stuck to her word in respecting what they said.
Much more to discuss on this throughout the programme. But a little earlier, I spoke to Jen Craft, who's MP for Thurrock, where Henry Nowak was from. Jen Craft, one officer who was involved in this terrible tragedy, has now resigned. Do you welcome that?
I do welcome it. I was thinking earlier that, if you know that that's something that you've been part of and that's happened, then perhaps that's a decision that you should take. But I do think that they need to be properly investigated. And if there's sort of any wrongdoing or professional misconduct, that needs to be treated accordingly.
Yeah, and obviously, all of the officers are witnesses in the IOPC, the watchdog investigation. Keir Starmer said that questions need to be answered. What questions would you like answered now?
I think there's a whole host of them. I think we need to know why the officers made the decision they did. The body-worn footage is absolutely horrific. I cannot imagine what the family think when they watch that, how that felt for them to watch that their loved ones' final moments were spent in that really, truly atrocious way, and almost the kind of, the cold rage that comes over you when you see something like that take place. I mean, the answers that they need are, why was that action taken? Why was their son identified as the perpetrator? Why did they make the decision to handcuff him? Why didn't they believe him when he said he'd been stabbed? Why didn't they believe him when he said he couldn't breathe? Why was the murderer allowed to just be arrested without handcuffs, for example?
You've just used the phrase cold rage. That's exactly the words that Nigel Farage used. So you share his anger at this?
I share the anger at watching what happened to my constituent, who was, by all accounts, a really, really lovely young man that had so much warmth around him. And you can tell the impact of his very, very short life by the outpouring of support that came for his family very, very soon after his death. And I think the rage I feel is just seeing how utterly unfair it feels that in his last moments, that's how he was treated.
Have you been in touch with the family?
I have, yes. So I've spoken to the dad before. I've emailed them as the case has been going on, just offering my kind of continued support. I've made it clear while the case was underway that I was very limited as to what I could say publicly. But when they were ready, I was ready to support them in whatever action they wanted to take.
You haven't been in touch with them since this political row has erupted?
No, I've sent them a few emails back and forth, but I really think we need to respect their privacy as well. I think that's something that's really, really important.
So, sorry, they have emailed you back?
Yes, they not since the conclusion of the court case, but while it was undergoing last week. And again, I was very circumspect in what I was able to say at that point.
Because, of course, the family of Henry Nowak have appealed to people not to use his death to exploit tension and division. Do you think those words have been ignored by Nigel Farage?
Yes. I think, to put it bluntly, I think there is a number of people that have seen what happened to Henry, and instead of taking a step back and thinking, look, I'm in a position of power, I'm in a position of privilege, and I should use that to make sure that his family can get the answers that they need, they have used it for their own political purposes.
Well, except you shared his anger about the police action, you said. So, I mean, you can sympathise with people saying, and Nigel Farage saying, this is an example of two-tier policing.
Mm. And I think that is the kind of political purposes that you kind of can turn it on its head to say. I think when you look at wanting to investigate what's happened, absolutely nothing should be off the table. You need to understand why the police acted in that way, what was motivating them. Are there wider cultural things that we need to discuss? Do we need to look at policing as a whole, or Hampshire policing, or just this particular unit?
But so as not to prejudge the investigation that's going on, allegations of two-tier policing should be investigated, in your view?
I think we should look at what were the motivations behind the police officers acting in the way that they did. And there will be a number of things that will have come into play when they attended that call. Some of the information that they had, some of their own potential biases that they bring to a situation. And we all know that everyone in a public sphere brings their own biases and prejudices into work. And it all needs to be looked at in the round.
So you don't deny that two-tier policing may exist? I'm not talking about this case in particular, but generally.
I think it very much doesn't. If you look at like the kind of way that policing has functioned as a whole for a long time now, I think it's a real stretch to kind of say, you know, this is something that is definitely happening. And I think it's just something where caution really needs to be looked at, because what does that say to people in their trust and their ability to call the police when something has happened to them?
You think
if you leap straight to these kind of conclusions?
You think that's being undermined?
I think it is. I think it really is. And I think if you use this phrase like two-tier policing and you try to establish this narrative that there is, you know, one way of policing for one group of people and another for another, without actually having, you know, the evidence or the real full view of what has occurred, then you risk stirring up quite a lot of this sort of tension, this division that Henry's dad made a huge plea for people not to do.
But, you know, now there are consequences, obviously, of this political anger. Police officers in your constituency have had death threats. Have you been in touch with them? What do you say about that?
I think it's appalling. And that's what I mean when you say, if you make these really big, sweeping statements about two-tier policing, that's where it leads. You know, people will be venting their anger on people, by and large, in the police force. You know, they go out of their way to help people on a daily basis. Even Henry's dad, Mark, you know, he said he has nothing but praise for the vast majority of police officers. And he named a number of them in his statement that had provided exemplary support for the family and made sure that their son's killer was brought to justice in a really, really quick and speedy manner. So I think you have to be really measured. And when I say, you know, this is a position of privilege, and it's something that you shouldn't ever take lightly. And our words, particularly as members of Parliament, carry so much weight beyond the house or a TV studio. And we need to be so aware of what we're saying and what we could be stirring up when we say it.
Nevertheless, you accept the anger about what appears to have happened here with the policing, subject to the inquiry, of course. There's been criticism from the Conservatives about this anti-racism commitment. According to Chris Philp, it urges police forces to reverse engineer the same arrest rates between different ethnic groups. Yeah. I mean, is that document going to be reviewed?
I have no idea what the kind of future of that is. But there is to be reviewed, well, I think if you look at, there is a history behind why there has been training in the police to stamp out things like racism, sexism, all kinds of like biases that have been inherent in the police force. I mean,
to redress decades of
absolutely,
racism within the police.
Decades and decades of institutional racism is the phrase that we're all very familiar with about the Met Police force.
Has that overshot now, and there's been a sort of adjustment the other way? That's what the Tories and Reformers say.
And I think there is a question there when you can see it through the lens of what happened to Henry, or you can see it as a wider lens, to ask, you know, are police, when they attend incidents, are they taking a view in the round of who they are there to help? You know, are they able to approach it with the right amount of, well, even curiosity, if you like? You know, are they able to reflect on who is the person here that we are here to make sure that, you know, they're being attended to? I mean, even a really basic level of when they arrive on scene, asking the question, is everyone here okay? You know, didn't seem to have occurred and didn't seem to have happened.
I mean, I suppose what the Conservatives are looking at and what Reform are looking at, you know, and, you know, there may well be a lot of public sympathy for this, is whether you look at the Nottingham killer, for example, Valdo Calacane, the Southport killer, Axel Ruda-Cabana. If you look at the grooming gangs, you know, there's evidence there where professionals have allowed fears of being accused of being racist to cloud their judgment and interfere with getting on with the job of apprehending people. Do you accept that there are now, you know, several instances where this has been a problem?
So I think you need to look at, I think the kind of through line for this is seeing sort of institutions at some point protecting themselves and protecting institutions, people not actually taking account of their own inherent biases when they approach a situation. So some of the assumptions that have been made around reporting sort of concerns that people have about people in certain communities, you know, and real worries there, I think they, you know, can always be undermined by an inherent sort of bias that people bring to the forefront. But I think it needs to be...
This is the opposite. This is people, you know, sort of trying to compensate for a bias. And in the end, you know, as Nigel Farage would say, you know, they're being prejudiced against white people.
I think it comes down to the same thing, to actually be able to approach a situation with an open mind and to look at it with a curiosity that says, look, who am I here to help? What is my job? What am I supposed to be doing here? And to be able to lay all those kind of prejudices and biases that you take take with you, that we all do have, into a room, put that to one side. And I think people do need the confidence to be able to do that, like no matter what colour, what race, what religion people they are dealing with bring to the forefront.
You said you felt cold rage. Do you have a sense of how many of your constituents feel about this and how worried you are now about this, you know, situation being inflamed and getting out of hand?
Lots of my constituents are similarly angry. Like I said before, there was this outpouring of support. You know, he's one of ours. They lined the streets for him on his funeral. You know, he's a boy that, like, the community have seen grown up. Like, he went to my old primary school, for example, and people have seen him grow up there and come into secondary school and start his life that was full of promise. And then for that to be so cruelly taken, and now we have this gut punch of seeing this body-worn camera footage last night, and there is an anger, you know, and people are saying, why was this allowed to happen? And I think even if you take the racial element out of it, could you imagine seeing your child in their last moments of life, someone's called the police, they've been stabbed, and the police handcuff them, you know, and don't listen to them when they're saying, I've been stabbed. It's like, of course, it's a pure human reaction. And when I say there's an anger there, I think we need to look at addressing what happened and why. And it's really, really important that not to turn that into that hatred and division that Henry's dad has warned against. And it's so easy to do that. When people are angry, it's so easy to look for an easy answer and an easy way out. And I think we need to be so careful not to do that, because it is absolutely not what the family deserve to have their son's name brought into a political sort of absolute political brouhaha where we're just using it for our own ends. It is not OK.
Jean Croft, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Just watching the Commons debate, it's really striking how much anger there is, both inside the Commons and outside, because Nigel Farage gave his statement outside. And it's such a contrast to less than 24 hours earlier, the family on the steps of the courtroom speaking so quietly but so powerfully. And you just wonder where this anger that's now been unleashed by the politicians, where that leads next. And I know a lot of MPs are really worried about that. Well, Ed and Thangam are on the sofa tonight. Are you worried, Thangam, about the anger that has been stoked? I mean, you heard the local MP there talking about her constituents feeling rage about this.
I'm worried about anger that's stoked in a particular direction, which is intended to divide us. And when tragedies happen, united is what we should be. We should be united against that sort of violence that has happened. We should be united in trying to work out how we do better as a country. We should be united in supporting the IOPC, the Police Constabulary Inspectorate, to do their job. We should also, most importantly of all, be united in support for the family and what they have said they wanted, which is for this not to divide us. So, I mean, I really am worried about the way that what Nigel Farage has said and has come out and has just said something which is completely unproductive, counter to what the family wants, and yes, is set to divide us. That does make me fearful.
But, you know, it's interesting, isn't it, that Keir Starmer is not repeating his earlier denial. You know, he was very clear that two-tier policing did not exist in this country. He's not repeating that. Is there a hint there that he thinks that Nigel Farage is onto something, or at least the public think he's onto something?
Where is Nigel's data? I don't see it. I mean, Nigel can keep saying, and this is what he does, if he keeps saying two-tier policing, he thinks it makes it a true thing. There is no data for this.
Well,
prisons, if we get...
There's his poll lead, for starters, suggests that there is public...
data.
But there's public sympathy for what he
But there's no data to that. There's no data to that.
Well,
and
when
Nigel Farage says that, he's never produced any data. And if you actually look at the prison population of this country, the majority of people in prison, it's disproportionately black and ethnic minority. Now, I'm not making
he would
comments.
talk about the grooming gangs, wouldn't he? And
he would.
The way that
he absolutely would. And
fears of racism were allowed to skew police investigations in that.
He absolutely would. That is not the whole of policing. That is not data. There have been systematic abuses by white men sexually abusing children of both black and white as well. And I don't hear him talking about those. Now, I don't want to come over all whataboutery, but Nigel has form here. He picks a case and he stokes up the division that he can see as the potential benefit to him and his cause. When he says two-tier policing, I do not see the data. I've asked You know, I've looked, I can't find it.
You know, the vast majority of offenders in the Rochdale and Rotherham grooming scandals were not white men, were they? I mean, let's be honest.
That is true.
About that.
And the vast majority of offenders of sexual assaults are white men, partly because that's the vast majority of this country. But he's giving the impression that only Pakistani men sexually abuse children. Most men do not sexually abuse any child. It's wrong wherever it happens. And he is bringing up that case over and over again. And one of the things he does, and he knows he's doing it, is to perpetrate a stereotype that Pakistani men are the only sort of sexual abuser there is, which is just not true.
OK, Ed, you'll see in a minute I interviewed Chris Philp, who's the Tory spokesman on this, and he cites Valdo Calacane, the Nottingham killer, the Southport killer, Axel Ruda-Cabana, you know, as evidence of where there were problems there because professionals, not just police, but professionals, were worried about being seen as racist, so they didn't do the investigations they should have done. He's your spokesperson.
Well, I don't agree with that analysis. I think that we are in danger of trying to demonise communities based on individual examples of bad people. And sometimes they are also, I have to say, individual examples of incompetence by the professional authorities. We don't know what happened on the terrible night that Henry Nowak was killed. We don't know what the context was for the police officers arriving at the scene. We weren't there. None of us were at the trial either. In terms of, in terms of the independent police complaints, in terms of
pushed out any idea of racism.
In terms of the independent police complaints, it is imperative that they do a quick report. What we don't want to see is this disappearing into a box and it comes out 2 or 3 years down the line. I don't want it done in a week. I want it done thoroughly, but I want it done quickly. I want a sense of urgency. The police are not perfect, and we know that if we're talking about institutional biases in the police. Think about the victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, how far we've probably moved in terms of what attitudes used to be to what attitudes are now, but they still need vast improvement.
Is this police anti-racism commitment, which was brought in, the foundations were laid under the Conservative government and it was then picked up by the Labour government. Is that problematic? I mean, should that be reviewed?
No.
Why would we not want to be against racism?
Yeah.
Why would we not want the police to be against racism? And I think the conclusion that the Tory spokesperson was drawing, and I can't remember who else's comment it was, it was Chris Philp himself. The conclusion that he's drawing, which is that anti-racism means being anti-white, that is just not true. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what racism is.
Is there an overcorrection?
Do you see any data for that? Has Chris Philp produced any data for that? No.
Well, maybe there should be data. Maybe we should be looking for the data.
Well, look then.
Well, I mean, maybe the data doesn't exist and we should be looking at it, but we're not because people aren't collecting the data.
Yes, people do collect data. People collect data on convictions, on arrests, and who's in the prison. Yes, they do. And if you look at it, and I have, there isn't this evidence of a widespread, whatever Chris Philp wants to call it, of an anti-white bias. Well, Nigel Farage calling it an anti-white bias. The evidence is just not there. And by picking out individual cases where awful things have been done by awful people who are from ethnic minorities and then building a case around that is absolutely unacceptable.
Well, when Zia Yusuf turns up in just a moment, you can challenge him on some of that and I'll pick up some of those points you've raised. So there's lots more still to come and we're going to be hearing from the Shadow Home Secretary next. We're talking about the tragedy of the murder of Henry Nowak. And a little earlier I spoke to Chris Philp, the Conservative Shadow Home Secretary. Chris Philp, the Nowak family have said they didn't want the death of their son to be used to create further division and tension. Isn't that exactly what you and the Reform Party are doing?
Well, I can't speak for Reform, but I can speak for us. And I think Kemi Badenoch made a very good point this morning when she said that we need to treat everybody equally, we need to avoid divisions in society, and we need to avoid categorising people according to racial or religious identity. That is a unifying message, which I completely agree with, and it's one that I echoed in Parliament today.
Well, it unites you and Reform. I mean, you agree with what Reform is saying on two-tier policing, do you?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's contentious to say that public bodies should treat everybody equally, regardless of race or religion. I think that is a sensible position to take, unify society, it avoids division, and it actually protects the public as well.
But Nigel Farage is calling for people to be angry about two-tier policing. Do you buy that?
Well, I'm not interested in commenting on Nigel Farage, but I do think there is an issue with policing, and I know that because their own policy document, it's called the Anti-Racism Commitment. It was published in March 2025, and it says the police should treat people differently based on their ethnicity.
I'll
now,
come
that is
back to
completely wrong in my view.
I know you want to talk about that document, and I do too. But do you think there is two-tier policing in this country? Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I do, because it's enshrined in that policy document, which then gets propagated via training, recruitment, leadership, culture and so on. The idea that people should be treated differently based on their ethnic identity is completely wrong, in my view. It's divisive, and it leads to the public not being protected properly.
And I will come back to that document, but do you also agree with Nigel Farage, who says white lives matter? That's a supremacist statement in the past. He's now saying it. Do you agree with it?
Look, I'm not interested in commenting on Nigel Farage.
Yeah, do you agree with that statement?
And all lives matter, right? We shouldn't be talking about this in terms of white lives or black lives, right? That is divisive.
But he is. Yeah, he is being divisive.
I'm not.
Right.
I'm saying all lives matter equally, and we should not be fixating on people's racial identity. We shouldn't be encouraging people to think of themselves in racial terms or religious terms.
Right.
We should think of ourselves as citizens of the United Kingdom. We're all equal under the law, and public bodies, like the police, should treat everybody the same. And as soon as you start using labels and treating people differently based on their colour, I think that's divisive, immoral and wrong.
Right. So there's a clear difference between what you're saying and what Reform is saying, but you do agree on this issue of two-tier policing. And there are consequences to that, aren't there? And the rhetoric that has now surrounded this. One of the consequences is that the police officers in this area are now living in fear of their lives. They've had death threats from an online mob. Do you deplore that?
Well, of course I do. Absolutely. Yes, look, police officers...
You're buying into it, though, aren't you, with the two-tier policing claim?
No, Cathy, that's nonsense. You can obviously believe that the way police policy has been constructed has flaws that need to be fixed. This document needs to be chucked in the bin, and we'll come on to it, I know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, of course, individual police officers doing their job should do so safely. There's 150,000-odd police officers, uniformed, warranted police officers, who every day put themselves at risk to protect the public, and we should commend them and thank them for doing that. And they certainly should never get any kind of personal threats or abuse, no matter what the circumstances, frankly. They're doing their job. If something goes wrong, there are processes to deal with that. Right. The IOPC, no police officer should ever be threatened or harassed in the way that we heard about today.
And the IOPC is looking into this tragedy now. Let's come to this document then that you're very keen to talk about. You criticise the police anti-racism commitment. You say that it's urging police forces to reverse engineer the same arrest rates between different ethnic groups. It all began under you, though. Do you accept it was a mistake in the first place, then?
Well, the document I'm referring to was published in March 2025.
Yeah, it came out of the Police Race Action Plan, which was under your
the document I'm referring to, that I have a problem with, was published in March 2025, and it says in black and white that they should, as you've quoted it, that they should reverse engineer the same arrest rates, and they should treat people differently. It even says expressly they should treat people differently based on their ethnicity, and it says policing should not be, and that's not a typo or a verbal typo, not be colourblind. I think that is outrageous.
But it came out of police race action plans that your government oversaw, and that was to address decades of racism identified by the STARMER report, the Macpherson report, and latterly the Casey review. It was to address that imbalance, and you endorsed it. Your government endorsed it. Was it a mistake?
Well, we certainly did not endorse this document because it was published a year after we left office.
You did.
So look, I think there's an important point here. So in the past, there were problems in the way policing and other public services were run. And any kind of racial discrimination is completely wrong, including, in the past, discrimination against, for example,
it's all gone now.
The black community. But so that needs to be that needed to be fixed, and a lot of work has been done to fix it.
Yeah, but it's not fixed, is it? That's the point.
Well, to be honest with you, I spent quite a lot of time with police officers. I do not think that the police today are institutionally racist.
They're 92% white for a start.
I don't think. Let me finish the point. I don't think they're institutionally racist, and I think the vast majority of police as individuals are not racist either. Now, when you overcorrect...
But there is still racism within the police. You accept that?
Some individual police officers, just as some individuals in any walk of life obviously are, but they're not institutionally racist, and the vast majority are not. The point I was going to make, Cathy, is that what's happened is there's been this sort of vast overcorrection, and they've embraced this ideology, so-called anti-racism. It's actually not anti-racism, it is itself racist, that says you should treat different ethnic groups differently. And this ideology, I think, is very cancerous, and it is itself racist. You should simply treat everybody the same. That avoids the evils of the past, which existed for sure, but it also avoids two-tier policing. Everyone should be treated the same. That shouldn't be contentious. That shouldn't be contentious.
But they're
and
not,
yet it is
are they?
contentious.
They're not treated the same when it comes to stop and search data. When it comes to all sort of deaths in police custody, black and minority ethnic people are overrepresented, and therefore they are suffering from decades of racism within the police.
Well,
There's evidence for that.
Well, let me take on your stop and search point. So if you compare the rate of stop and search in London, say, not to the general population, which like includes, you know, elderly people and everything, but if you compare it to the offending population, then for violent crime, for example, then you find the disproportionality almost completely disappears.
Almost completely.
I mean, virtually, to within like a few percent.
Deaths in police custody,
within a few percent.
black people
and
are
let me just
vastly overrepresented.
Let me just finish the point. Let me finish one on stop and search. So, and then secondly, if you look at the success rate of stop and search, so the percentage of stop and searches resulting in drugs or a knife being found, if the police were being racist and picking on the black community, to put it crudely, then you'd expect the success rate to be lower because they were picking on people unfairly. In fact, the success rate for stop and search in London is about the same across all ethnic groups. The police aren't picking on people unfairly. They're responding to threats and an assessment of suspicion, and the stop and search rates broadly follow the demographics of the offending population.
So you don't think it's true to say that the vast majority of evidence suggests that people being discriminated against by the police are black and minority ethnic, not white people? You don't think that's true?
I don't think the police generally are systematically discriminating. I think there's this document we've referred to that actively calls for different ethnic groups to be treated differently, and that is wrong. And I'll give you an example of how that can cause damage in practice. This is actually a mental health example, not a police example, but the same principle applies. Valdo Caliconi, you remember, the man who murdered 3 people in Nottingham, was previously detained by police, who then got mental health professionals involved, and they were looking at sectioning him under the Mental Health Act, so detaining him under the Mental Health Act. And they said that because the data showed, the kind of data you're quoting, that black men are overrepresented in the mental health system when it comes to being sectioned, that was a consideration for not sectioning Valdo Caliconi, so they let him go. He then went on to murder 3 people. That is an example of the damage that this kind of ideology does in practice.
Okay, and it's one example. Valdo Calicane, that is one example, and there are vast...
Do you want to give some more?
But I'm afraid we're out of time.
not detaining the Manchester attacker because they were worried about being accused of racism.
And all these examples, there's about 3 or 4 examples.
The grooming gangs example, that was decades. Ignoring the grooming gangs example, decades and decades.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through every evidence of this and then compare it with the evidence on arguing the opposite. But, Chris Philp, thank you very much for coming in.
A pleasure.
Well, I'm joined now by Zia Yusuf, Home Affairs spokesman for Reform UK. Zia, I know you're stuck in traffic because of the tube strike. You were hoping to join us on the sofa, so apologies about that, but thanks for being with us. Just first, the Nowak family said yesterday outside the courtroom that they didn't want the murder of their son to be used to stoke division. Isn't that exactly what you're doing?
My heart goes out to him and to Henry's entire family. I can only imagine what they're going through. What Reform and Nigel are doing is quite the opposite of that, Cathy. What we're trying to do is advocate for an end to two-tier policing and for a Britain in which you're treated the same, regardless of what religion you are or what race you are. That is what we've been advocating for. Well, no, that is exactly what we've been advocating for.
It's not quite that simple, though, is it? Because Nigel Farage issued a statement on camera calling for people to respond with pure, cold rage. That's incitement, isn't it?
Did you watch the body cam footage, Cathy?
I did watch the body cam footage, and I also watched Nigel Farage's statement.
And what emotions did you feel? Cathy, what emotion did you feel having watched it?
I'm asking you whether that's incitement.
With respect, I'm asking you what emotion you felt having watched the body cam footage.
I'm conducting this interview, so I'm asking you
Henry Nowak
if
being
that
read
is
his
incitement.
rights, having been arrested, Cathy. Henry Nowak's the last words Henry heard on this earth were his rights, having been arrested by the police, bleeding to death. And my question to you, genuinely, it's a sincere question, human to human, Cathy.
Zia,
how did you feel watching that footage?
Zia, if you could let me ask my question, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and that is why the family said they wanted to turn that into something that would not create more division. I'm asking you if Nigel Farage suggesting to people that they feel cold, pure cold rage, is that inciting people to feel anger?
Well, Cathy, you have not answered my question, which is what emotion did you feel having watched that body cam footage?
I'm interviewing you, so I would like you to ask that question. Is that incitement or not? It's simple.
OK, well, I will tell you, having watched that footage myself, I was furious about it. I think millions of people in this country of all sorts of races and religions based on the people who are speaking to me and sending me messages constantly, they were absolutely furious about it as well, because it was a crystal clear example of two-tier policing. And how on earth the police, upon attending the scene, took more seriously an accusation of racism than an accusation of having been stabbed.
Well,
Paul
the
Henry
police
said repeatedly
and that
to the
is
police,
being,
said
and Zia, that
repeatedly to the police that I've been stabbed. And the police said, and this is burnt into my memory now, it's so horrifying, the police responded with, I quote, "I don't think you have, mate." So the burden of proof was on Henry to prove that he had been stabbed, and yet there was no burden of proof on the murderer who had accused Henry of racism. And if that doesn't make you angry,
if I could just ask a question, because otherwise we're not. This is supposed to be a conversation. I'm not saying that I'm not angry. My heart is broken for the family, of course, and it is enraging. I understand that, but I'm asking about the fact that politicians are stoking this anger has consequences, doesn't it? You know, there is a police officer who is in hiding because of death threats. He was mistaken as someone who was involved in this, and he wasn't, and he's now in hiding. You know, do you condemn calls for some kind of vigilante justice against the police officers involved here? Do you condemn that?
Sorry, who's calling for vigilante justice against officers?
There are death threats online circulating. There's misinformation circulating online. Do you condemn that? Do you sympathise with the police
obviously,
officer who's in hiding?
Of course, I would condemn that, and I take exception to this notion that connecting that with anything that Nigel said. But are you saying, Cathy, that it is inappropriate to take anger that people feel as a result of this tragedy for political purposes? Is that what you're putting to me?
I'm listening to what the family has said, and they said they don't want this terrible tragedy to be used to stoke division. And that is what we have. We have this huge political row now. We have Nigel Farage making claims that white lives matter, which is a slogan that was used by, the UK's largest white supremacist group. Are you happy with him using that phrase?
Cathy, what Nigel Farage said today was that white lives matter as much as black lives. Do you disagree with that statement?
You seem to be conducting an interview with me, but I'm trying to ask you the question.
I'm asking you whether you disagree with the statement
because
that
you're the
firstly,
politician.
I'm correcting, with respect, Cathy, I'm correcting you on this, because to leave out the second half of the sentence, I think is deliberately misrepresentative and misleading. So Nigel said that white lives matter as much as black lives. And my question to you is, do you disagree with that statement?
And my question to you is about Nigel Farage's claims of anti-white prejudice. I mean, there is overwhelming evidence, isn't there, of police racism over the decades against black minority ethnic people. You've got to go back to the STARMER report, the Macpherson report, the Casey review. There are decades of racism by the police against black minority ethnic people. Do you accept that that is a fact?
I'm kind of stunned that you couldn't bring yourself to say that you agree with the statement that white lives matter as much as black lives. I can't understand why you can't just confirm you agree with that statement.
Zia, you're the senior member of a party. You're a politician. My job is to hold you to account, so I'm asking you these questions. And I would love you to answer that question about racism against black and minority ethnic people by the police. There are a lot of people who are angry because they see every day, the stop and search data. They see that. They see the deaths of black people in police custody. And they're saying, where is your anger about that?
Well, again, I don't understand why you can't bring yourself to confirm that you agree with the statement that white lives matter as much as black lives. Clearly, it is unacceptable for anyone to be discriminated against based on immutable characteristics by the police or anybody else. But, Cathy, you've been conducting this interview on a premise that it is wholly inappropriate to watch that body cam footage and be furious. It is wholly inappropriate to conclude from watching that body cam footage that there should be some political ramifications for this. When in 2021, Cathy, you wrote op-ed after op-ed, article after article in newspapers like The Independent about George Floyd. In fact, let me quote you your own words. You said that you expressed delight that the BLM hashtag transported, and this is a direct quote from you, Cathy, transported the rage of George Floyd's death across the four corners of the globe.
Zia,
so
I've said
the point
to
that we
you,
are making
Zia,
is that
I've
there
said
is
to you,
a totally
I understand
different
people
reaction,
are angry,
a totally
but
different reaction, a totally different reaction, Cathy, not just from you. I'm only putting that to you because I'm speaking to you now, but I'm afraid this has been endemic across most of the media landscape in this country and the institutions in this country. And the reality is this: because Henry
Zia, may
was
I
a
just
white
respond
man,
to that
because
point?
Henry was a white man,
Zia,
because Henry was a white
Zia,
man,
you seem to
people
be
are
interviewing
simply
me,
unwilling
but
to accept that this sort of thing exists.
Zia, I can see you're on broadcast mode, but if you'd listened to my monologue at the start of this show, I know you were on a rival show, so that was impossible for you. But I reflected on the public anger and the anger that people feel. But I also reflected on the concerns that MPs have, including the constituency MP of Henry Nowak, who is worried about that anger being stoked by politicians for their own ends, for political ends. I'm asking you about that. I'm reflecting on that. But I would also like to ask you about racism in the police, which we've just talked about. I mean, I wonder whether you think 92% of police officers in England and Wales are white. Do you think they are going to be guilty of systematic prejudice against white people? Do you think that's likely?
Not only is it likely, it's demonstrable. You can go to Hampshire Police's website as we speak. You can read their, quote, race action plan that, by the way, was brought into being under a Tory government. And what that does is make crystal clear that the police must prioritise accusations of racism. And this is why it's actually really important, Cathy, because you're talking about the politicisation of this. The reality is that the only way we are going to prevent systematic racism against any race or any religion inside the police is through political action. I'm sure you agree with that because you've expended considerable amounts of your own energy in pursuit of that. But it only seems to be in one direction.
Zia, you know, this is a bit like this interview, but you know the police action plan was brought in to address decades of racism against black and minority ethnic people by the police. So that was why it was to correct an imbalance there that had lasted for decades. Do you accept that that was necessary?
Legislation and initiatives like that must be judged on the impact that they have and the outcomes that they create, not the intentions of those that created them. I'm not impugning the intentions of the people who created all of that, but what is crystal clear is that what we saw in that harrowing, distressing, and tragic body cam footage is directly downstream. And anyone watching this, whether you agree with the reform or not, I encourage you to go and read the race action plan on Hampshire Police's website. Go and read that in full. It's not a particularly long page, but there's a lot there. And what it makes crystal clear is that the reaction of the police, the fact that that footage proves that the burden of proof for a man making an accusation of racism was zero. Henry was arrested pretty much immediately, even as he was bleeding to death. Yet the burden of proof for Henry in saying repeatedly that I've been stabbed was such that the police responded as he bled to death by handcuffing him and saying, I don't think you have, mate. And Cathy, I put it to you as you know, human to human, if you can't see that as evidence of anti-white discrimination in the conduct of those attending officers, then I'm afraid we cannot be have been watching the same footage.
See, we've discussed that at length, and I wonder, given your concern about, understandable concern about the body cam footage, whether you've been in touch with the family, whether Nigel Farage has been in touch with the family, and asked them whether this is what they wanted, this debate.
I haven't been, and I'm not going to comment on Nigel's confidential and private conversations. I don't think that that is appropriate, but my convictions around this issue and Nigel's convictions around this issue are around ensuring that we have one law for everybody. And, you know, you put to me earlier, you know, am I concerned about discrimination against ethnic minorities? But to the degree that that is happening, of course I'm concerned by it, Cathy. But we are making an argument based on the footage. It is an 18-year-old student who happens to be white who has just been murdered, and was the last words he heard on this earth were his rights being read to him by British police officers who did not believe him when he told them that they had been stabbed. And I'm afraid,
many
Cathy,
times. I very
that is
much
what we need to be
appreciate you
talking
being
about
with
right
us
now.
tonight. It's a shame you couldn't be on the sofa, but thank you very much for joining us. Very brief word, Thangam, your reaction to what you've just heard.
I think we've heard again this accusation, this assertion, let's call it an assertion, from a spokesperson for reform that there is two-tier policing. That is dangerous if they have no evidence, and they don't have evidence. Just saying it over and over again doesn't make it true. Now, if it is true, when they say that there is discrimination against white people, that is a serious charge to make. He wouldn't acknowledge what you were putting to him, quite rightly, that there have been decades of racism against black people by the police, and the police are trying to do something about that, and that's what core being anti-racist means. It doesn't mean not believing, having a systematic approach that privileges black people over white people. That's not in their policy. I've been checking what's in that police action plan. That is not what it says. And it is dangerous for him to make this assertion without any evidence based on one case.
Nigel Farage has clearly not spoken to the family or asked their permission. No one from Reform has.
What did you think of what you just thought, very briefly?
Because of this debate, there are people laying siege to Southampton Police Station, making the police officers less safe, Southampton less safe. I'm reminded, by the way, that a few weeks ago, a Muslim man allegedly stabbed 2 Jewish people in North London. There was outrage over the way the police reacted from one political leader on the other side of the fence, Zach Polanski. People quite rightly said, you weren't there, you don't know what the situation was.
Right.
They reacted as they had to.
Got to end it there, but thank you both for joining me on the sofa. Shame that Zia wasn't here, but thank you, the audience, for joining us. Thanks, Ed and Thangam here, and for the team behind the scenes. We'll see you again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Very good evening to you.